My name's Mac. I lead the Stripe team here in Australia and New Zealand. And as we build economic infrastructure for the internet, meaning helping companies of all size with global payments or launch new kinds of business models, we get to see firsthand how online commerce really is at an inflection point. And we've got companies like SiteMinder and Ayuda and Xero and Chargebee who are bringing offline businesses online or helping entirely new businesses start and grow. And so as we see that, going global becomes a key question, especially as we've got a relatively small market in Australia for most industries. And so we tend to be thinking about that international piece almost earlier than in other countries. And even though the internet maybe is making it easier to reach and connect with users and customers, the operational aspects of those businesses are actually getting harder and harder. And so it's great to have people here who have lived and breathed that in their businesses to have a bit of a discussion about that today. So maybe to start with, it's just worth introducing everyone. So does everyone want to do a quick intro about them, their company, and their experience in going global?
Sure. So I'm Managing Director of Ayuda Media Systems in APAC, based in Sydney. So we are a software company based in Canada. And in the last 2 years, we developed our business in Australia. And then last year, we started also expanding in Asia. What we do is we provide a software for out-of-home media owners. Out-of-home advertising is the advertising that you can see in the streets on billboards and or on bus shelters or on public transport. So we provide a software for these companies to run their business and basically push the campaigns on these screens. So yeah, happy to share.
Hi, my name's Dai Williams. I work for SiteMinder. We provide an acquisition platform for hotels. So effectively, we help them list on sites like Booking.com, Expedia, Airbnb. We provide technology that helps hotels get direct bookings as well. We started on the northern beaches of Sydney. We are headquartered in the Rocks now, and we are probably 5x the biggest company of what we do in the world. We've got about 35,000 hotels around the world that use our software. We've got about 650 staff who are predominantly based in Western Europe and the US. Personally at SiteMinder, probably two most relevant roles. I ran our global sales when we expanded from 5 reps to 100. We kind of expanded up through our Series B. And I was managing director for Europe, where we had about 180 staff in 2 locations in Europe, primarily targeting the UK, France, Germany, Spain, and Italy.
Hi everyone, Amanda Cornish. I'm from a company called Xero. So Xero, if you're not aware, is a small business platform. Originally we started out in accounting software and we've now built up to an ecosystem of around 700 plus apps, and we're connected to over 100 banks within Australia. And really what we do is we facilitate collaboration between accountants and bookkeepers and small businesses. And my particular role is a global role building product. So right now I'm working to build integrated payment solutions for bill and supply payments and employee payments across all of our key markets. So in about 5 different countries right now: Australia, New Zealand, Singapore, UK, and the US. And in preparation for today, I just flew back from London, so I've got jet lag to talk to you about this global discussion. So if I fall asleep, please make sure you poke me.
Thank you. My name is Krish. I'm co-founder and CEO of Chargebee. Chargebee specializes in subscription management and recurring billing. So when we started off the company, we started in a very small market, which had regulatory challenges. So from the beginning, it has been a B2B global play for us. So hopefully we'll be able to share some relevant insights based on my experience. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Where I'd actually love to start is almost timing. Like we mentioned, it's often going to be something to get real global scale out of Australia. You're going to think about global pretty early, especially if you're a startup. So maybe talk to us about how or when you started thinking about it and what criteria you thought about it. And if Krish, you want to start?
Sure. So for us, from the beginning, it has been a global play because as a B2B SaaS product, the only way we could acquire customers was through forums like Hacker News, Content Marketing, and others. And there's no way for you to, for us to put a filter to say, this is the only country in which we operate in, right? Unlike a payment provider where it's specific to each country. As a SaaS product, you are already agnostic of countries, agnostic of underlying infrastructure beneath it, right? As long as I can support a Stripe or a Braintree or a PayPal, any of that, we are readily available. And which means that the inquiries come from everywhere. Like, so which means that straight away you are born global and you are stretched thin in terms of support and sales. And most of the time I'm jet lagged because of the phone calls at 3 or 4 a.m. in the morning.
Yeah. And Amanda and Dai, is that similar for you, both SaaS companies? Was there a when thought about when to go, or was it more like we effectively are because we're SaaS?
I think so. Xero is a company that's about 12 years old, and Xero founder Rod Drury always said from day one that he wanted to build a global company, and I think that really is reflected in how rapidly we've been able to expand. So I think, the key points are think global from day one and also really plan and invest accordingly. That would be my advice.
Yeah, I think for us it was really understanding our total addressable market around the world. And for those of you that are not familiar with the hotel space, particularly independent kind of motels and bed and breakfasts, 70% of the stock sits in Western Europe. So for us, it was a matter of, kind of proving the value in the product and that we've got product market fit in general. We saw a lot of traction coming from around the world just because, people find you. But then we had this kind of big inflection point. We said, actually, if we really want to get big, we have to kind of shift to being a very aggressive outbound sales org, which was probably our big shift. So a whole lot of stuff comes into your product market fit from a country relevancy perspective. So for us to really expand and scale, we have to be incredibly relevant in every single country that we operate kind of intently. So you see markets where you kind of pick up people that come to you, but we'll have a country like Spain, for example, where we've got 15 reps making 40 to 70 phone calls a day. And when you're selling that kind of product, you've got to appear as local as if you're selling in Australia. So there's a lot that goes into that from a sequencing perspective, because you kind of want to go to a market where your product first doesn't actually need that much work to be local. So for us, it was about expanding to places like the UK, because there was a pretty nice similarity in business model and go-to-market product. But when you move to Western Europe and Southeast Asia, the kind of dial changes. So we staggered those a bit later because there was a much heavier product investment.
Yeah. And so I guess you got onto there, like the which countries almost based on that fit side. Remi, it sounded like you've had a Canada, Australia, now into Asia. How have you thought about which countries and the criteria for picking where next?
So on our side, we provide a software for a niche market, right? So we cannot just stay in one country. We had to expand internationally. And the countries were driven by what we do in existing markets. Can we find similar countries? So, for instance, we were quite strong in the US. Then Australia was, a good landing platform for APAC. So we focused on that. And because our software needs a lot of implementation services, so we had to find first a contract to be able to come here. So we invested in selling from overseas and winning our first contract. And then it's only when we won our first contract here that we started building the business.
Yeah, great. I think we touched a bit on product there, and I think when I think of Xero, Amanda, I think of Xero's very product and customer, even ecosystem you mentioned, which I think is one thing Xero's done incredibly well. How have you dealt with that as you've gone into, like, obviously every country is a little bit individual and unique? What challenges have you thought through there?
Yeah, it's actually really challenging. You might start out in one particular market, and for us that was New Zealand, and we essentially started building accounting software, which can be scalable but is actually quite regional as well, because you've got different legislation, you've got different taxation systems. So I think what we've really been able to do is tackle, country by country, moving from New Zealand. Obviously, local next option for us was to move into Australia, and then expanding to the US and the UK. And there's a lot of challenges that come with that around different time zones and product market fit. And I think you if you don't stay close to what the customers in that particular market want, then you're really going to struggle. And the challenge is coming in with a product that you know has worked in one market, really testing it in that market, but rapidly modifying where you need to and where that product isn't actually working, because you will find some surprises and some challenges in new markets, and you tend to bring in your own learned experience of the location that you maybe grew up or where you've built your business. But what you'll find is that those experiences might not be relevant in a new market. So I think it's really important. For me, I'm just all about getting customer feedback all the time, continuously throughout the whole process of building product.
Great. Anything to add for you guys? I guess product's probably a pretty heavy anchor as you go country by country.
Yeah, I mean, it's great if you got a product that you can basically sell and implement, without being in the country. On our side, that's not the case. I mean, we need to be pretty hands-on. So I think if you can have the time to build your product locally and then be able to after that expand internationally, that's great. But usually that's not often the case, I think.
Yeah, and I would say one thing that, this is a very broad comment, but generally Aussie and Kiwi companies tend to build incredibly good product because the product's what the company stands by. A lot of the US companies tend to rely a lot on previous relationships to power the start of their businesses. So Aussie and Kiwi product tends to be very, very strong. And because we have to expand so early, like the Xero guys have to expand and we have to expand very early, you become very attuned as to what a local buyer is going to want in your product. And there's the feedback loop is super critical to being relevant for that user. Because at the end of the day, if you are an accounting business in the UK or a bed and breakfast in Spain, you're going to have two choices. You're going to have a company like Xero or SiteMinder who are a good global company, or you're going to have the local competitor who will probably not be as rich in the feature set. So you've got to be local, but because you have the global scale, you can kind of outstrip them.
Thank you. Just a slightly different perspective, which we took from the beginning, was to look at the global traffic for us in Google Analytics. Starting with that, we started looking at the inquiries, and then we picked the hardest problem in that market that we need to solve in the product that will get us traction. Because the inquiries could be coming from everywhere, but then when we looked at it, for us, EU in 2016 was going through this EU VAT challenge, and we said, if we were to build that feature first and solve the hardest problem for that market first, that could get us the most traction in one market and become the anchor market, right? While we continue to build out in other places. And that was actually super helpful for us to pick what is that pain that everybody is talking about today that is very relevant, right? So from beginning of our late part of 2015, everybody in Europe was talking about that. And Australia had this GST change with inclusive tax, exclusive tax and all that. And then we picked that problem and then started solving that in invoicing. And that helped us, right? We, of course, connect with Stripe as well as Xero. But then from subscription perspective, this was important for businesses. And they said, we need that solved. Yep. So from product thinking perspective, it was very helpful to look at some of the hardest problems, try and solve that for that market first, simply because anyways you are global.
Yep. So maybe let me go a little bit deeper on the product thing and maybe ask you, or all of you, a slightly harder question then as well, because I think it's ultimately, probably we've all got constrained resources. So how do you work through the prioritization question? Because customers will tell you in Spain, B2B, something's important, VAT's important, GDPR, PSD2, you name it, there'll be compliance for Xero, etc. How do you juggle the prioritization question of the marquee user from New Zealand versus the small sort of new one in the new country? How do you manage the processes around prioritization, especially into engineering?
So for us, it's more of trying to put a dollar value to in terms of ROI, right? In terms of feature that needs to be built versus the ROI, and the time that is available, right? You hardly have initial days. You hardly have like a couple of engineers working on any particular module, and that's harder. So we try to put our hypothesis to say, okay, so what are the competing priorities this quarter in terms of product features, and what is that? Is it going to bring in delight or more customers, right? And just try to look at it from that framework has been helpful to say, okay, if we solve EU VAT and you look at the support inquiries and the product inquiry conversations, and you would get a sense of, okay, so this seems to be a real pressing problem, and if we solve that well, this is going to happen. So you have the product manager actually do the research around just that one feature to try and see, are we really going to solve a pain, or is it a nice to have that people are asking for?
Yep.
So.
Yeah, and I think, the compliance piece kind of goes without saying that you generally have to do that. So it's always an interesting conversation that's going to fall into the prioritization. Essentially, with my team, we're doing prioritization pretty much on a weekly basis. And for us, it's really challenging because we are building product right now in 5 different countries, and the maturity level of those markets are all actually quite different within our own business. So one of the things we really focus on is assessing true product management, which is assessing, is this going to drive benefit for the customer? Is this going to drive revenue for the business? And then prioritizing based on those factors in a true product management sense. So we do that. We work agile, we work in 2-week sprints, and every 2 weeks we're assessing our priorities, and they do change every 2 weeks, which makes for some interesting times.
Yeah, and I think the lens on top of that as well is what's the top-down strategic like kind of goals of the company for the next kind of 12, 24 months, because you're going to have to make some compromise decisions no matter what you're doing, and it's easy to listen to the loudest voice in the room, which will tend to be an anchor client in an existing market that you're quite well penetrated in. For example, expanding internationally takes a fair amount of cojones, because you do have to make decisions where you've got the client to say that might be, because you're small stage, paying 30% of your revenue, but you have to choose. You're going, look, we've got data, and we've got there's art and science. We've got data, and we've got feel that country X is our next big expansion. There's big opportunity for us to grow there, and we're going to dedicate the next 3-4 sprints, or whatever it is, to building features for us to be successful there. But to do that, you are making compromise decisions about what you're not doing in your home market, or vice versa. Right? If you decide to build that, you're then compromising potential future growth. So it's almost a matter of what you say no to is more important than what you say yes to.
And just to complement what has been said, which I fully agree with, what you can try is to make these customers that are really demanding these features, localization features, to pay for them. And just not give them for free. And the other option is that you can try to hold on developing these features and test the market first, and then when you see that you start to have a lot of traction in the market, in the local market, then you start investing more in these localization features. So that's a few tips that we can add.
Great. I think what we got onto was a bit of the how, which I think is really interesting, because it's nice to have a plan, but execution obviously matters a lot. One part we didn't talk about, or another part, I guess, of the how would be like organizationally or structurally. Maybe it sounds like you've been on the journey from, 5 to 100. How did that journey evolve from like initially through to now?
Yeah, so start up at SiteMinder, there were 5 of us in the company, and we've kind of grown to 650 now. The structure you put in place to start with will almost, I can guarantee you, will not be the structure you end with a year later or a year after that. There are 2 kind of core things that have happened with our structure over time, and the first one is that SiteMinder is inherently inside sales SMB business, and the important side of that is when it comes to how we structure our regions, the leader of our regions is really someone that runs the inside the 4 walls business. So they're the person that runs the tactical marketing, operational sales, implementation, and everything inside the company. And the overlay to that is as we grew and we scaled, we found Sydney a pretty tough market to find top exec talent. So our regional leaders would actually run, as we were growing, they were effectively proper GMs, right? They would make tactical marketing decisions, they would make tactical sales decisions. But as we've buffered up our leadership, and we've got a much stronger leadership group that we sit here in Sydney, as we've got stronger in that, we've actually found the role of our regional lead has shifted from being the person that's inside the 4 walls kind of greasing the funnel to the person who's outside the 4 walls doing biz dev and key account management. So that's a really interesting structure. You get these really strange matrix reporting lines where who's accountable for the performance of our sales in Europe? Is it our Europe lead or is it our sales lead? And now that we've got a strong exec, it always falls back to the functional lead. So that's been a very tough learning for us, because the profile of leader we've had in the regions, we've had to cycle and change, because we've gone from someone who gets the mechanics of the funnel to someone who's actually, quite strong in a networking capacity.
Yeah, and I suppose I could add to that as well. We very, very similar in the context of having a global team as well as regional teams in all of our key markets. And I think the interplay between those teams is essential, and having really strong communication where our global teams are primarily delivering our product, and then our local teams are responsible for go-to-market, sales strategy, marketing, etc. So I think getting the collaboration right between the local knowledge and also the global team is really important, because you can scale faster if you build product in a global capacity. But in terms of getting traction within that market, it's really essential that you have a team on the ground that understands the market, understands the customer pain points, and can really work with you on that local basis.
And does that combine with, just sorry on that one, you mentioned go to market, but did you mention before you're building product in 5 countries?
Yes.
How does that overlap or not overlap?
It keeps me extremely busy because I work with 5 different go-to-market teams. So yeah, it's challenging, but there's a lot of benefit there, and you can really, what you essentially can do is you can take something that you're building in 5 different countries, and you look for the similarities, and then you can build on the similarities and build that into a product or a platform, and then obviously create various different nuances for each market. And if you don't have that whole view, you'll end up building product in every market, and you'll have all of these fragmented solutions that you have to continue to maintain, and that is absolutely not a scalable approach.
This is very helpful learning for us because we don't have the teams on the ground anywhere. So more than 3 years back, we were completely, I think, a 30 member team globally, right? When I say globally, right, just the customer base is global, but then we were all based in Chennai, and we did not even have the San Francisco office. But today, we have a 174 member team with a few people in San Francisco, and then most of the team in Chennai. And just the support alone is about 32 people, right? But the challenge that I used to face, slightly different, right, from a perspective of team structure. The early days, it used to be, okay, so who should handle the customer support? What is the phone number that you put on your website for support our sales? And where should it redirect to used to be my problem, right? And all of it, I used to give 1, 2, 3 options in the phone number, but then all of it would come to my phone number, my mobile. And over a period of time, I figured that this is just not scalable, because there are those early morning calls that you would take, and then I would forget to log them in a CRM, or even I would have offered the solution, but then I don't even know who I spoke with, right? Because I'm already sleepwalking. So that used to be the challenge. But later on, I found some tools which were actually useful. One of our own customer was based in UK, and this person used to run large call centers and said, hey, I see that you are offering 24/7 support, 24/5 support for customer support and sales, but then how can I help you? And he was setting up a small startup, and I asked him to actually take up. So what I did was have these phone numbers and specific hours. I would redirect all the inquiry calls to his cell phone, his number, and he was able to offer that service at £49 a month is where we started. Probably we were paying, I think after a couple of years, we were paying him £500 a month. But the best thing was for about 6 hours that I needed, where there was someone who could actually pick up the phone locally and then answer. I was able to leverage that with under £100 per month by having someone actually take up those first inquiry calls, create them as a customer support ticket so it comes through email. So there is someone always available to attend, right? Because we just couldn't hire fast enough, or we did not know if we should actually be hiring before we were having the pain, right? It's always catch-up game. Yeah. So that was one. And now the way we do that is we have people attending to these calls in sales and support slightly differently with more people and all that. It becomes a lot more easier.
Yep. Yeah, I'll come back to your tools point, but just while we're on the structuring team type points, Remi, I think you mentioned that you took a slightly different approach with how you thought about service providers and contractors and things in markets. What was the thinking there?
Yeah, so I started by myself here and grew the team. The first thing that I did is that I contacted some business consultants to help me. So HR, legal, accounting, all of these kind of services that you can get to help you grow the team. You cannot do it by yourself, so you have to think about being surrounded by these kind of experts who are going to help you grow the organization locally. So I think that's pretty important. And there are lots out there. They are not so expensive in the end. They save you money, they save you time, and I think that's very important to use these kind of services.
So on the tools point that you mentioned, I think we did some surveying a little while back that mentioned that I think 97% of startups thought that tech tools had helped them go global or helped them accelerate go global. I'd be intrigued, does that resonate with you all, and have you found any particular kind of tools that have made it easier in any of your kind of expansions?
Yeah, I think it's impossible to do it without it, to be perfectly honest, on multiple fronts. I think the Zero product example is a really good one. Like, how do you garner product feedback back into a central hub to kind of decipher what's going on? From a sales and acquisition and customer life cycle, you need some pretty strong analytical understanding of what's going on with your customer base. So one of the things in hindsight that we did incredibly wrong was we took a pretty big Series B from Silicon Valley, got way too overexcited, and went from 150 staff to 500 in about 15 months. And the majority of them were not in Sydney. So as we grew overseas, we didn't back up the people growth with process and operational growth. And where it really came home to roost was when you can see everyone, that theory of like when you stand up on a chair as a CEO and someone in the room says, "We can't hear you, your business is inherently changed." We couldn't hear everyone, and we didn't know what everyone was up to. And because we didn't have the operational A, systems, and B, rigor, it becomes very hard to diagnose when stuff's not working. So very, very tactical example, when we were selling in France, our reps kept telling us that we would lose deals to competitors. And until we got a very strong discipline on how we managed our funnel, only when we started managing our funnel well did we actually realize that we win more competitive pitches than we lose, but our actual problem as France is we can't open enough opportunities. So when you're sitting in Sydney, you're a long way away from the action, particularly when you're in the US and Europe, and you need that rigor around the operations and the systems to actually run and diagnose your business, because otherwise you're just relying on what the people in market will tell you, and they will tell you two things all the time. One, your product's too expensive, or two, your competitors are beating you, and it's not always the case.
Yeah, I think tools are very important. When you compare them to the time that they save you, it's a no-brainer. So don't hesitate to invest in any kind of tools like software as a service tools or any other structure that you can put in place that will save you a lot of time, a lot of money. So yes, on our side, we of course the tools that we use, conference calls, Slack, things like this, instant messages, Xero. We use this kind of software, and that's how we operate. So even if you want to try one for a while, and after a while you are going to abandon it, it's better to try and test it rather than just say, well, I'm going to do this in an Excel spreadsheet, which is the worst thing that you can imagine, and then basically feel the pain all along.
Yeah, for us, for US expansion, tools from a compliance standpoint, tools like Gusto has been very helpful because it just takes care of the payroll, HR, insurance, all of that, right, rolled into one bundle. It has been super helpful from compliance standpoint. From a market expansion standpoint, from a customer base perspective, I think it's a combination of tooling plus process, as you mentioned, because who evaluates your product and the buying process changes very drastically by country, right? Where if you are dealing with North America, most likely it's the buyer themselves, either a product manager or a developer who's evaluating the product, and they are more likely to make the decision, right? Very differently compared to a market like UK or Australia, where we have found that there are more consultants who are actually signing up on behalf of the customers evaluating the product on behalf of the clients, which also works very differently, which means that your sales process cannot be the same for different markets, and you have to fine tune that based on some of this. So a combination of tooling and plus process has been very helpful.
Yeah, great. One other theme before we maybe take some questions, so if people want to think of questions. Last one would be, I guess, just around challenges. I think, Amanda, you touched on before that each countries have their uniquenesses, or regions have uniquenesses, whether it's compliance or tax or regulatory, or how people want to get paid, or how people want to receive their money. And there's probably even a cultural overlay to that. What was, maybe each of you, what was kind of the biggest challenge you think back to from an expansion point of view, and maybe what would have you done differently? Anyone?
So I think probably at a macro level, challenges that you'll face coming into a new country really come down to some cultural differences. So if you build a company culture that promotes diversity and inclusion from day one, then effectively when you go into new markets and you see new cultures, new ideas, new people, your people are actually really already geared up to be able to deal with some of those challenges and to accept and actually embrace some of the differences when you go into new markets. And then, you know, great, probably micro example, I spent 4 years living in the US, and when I got over there, I leased an apartment, and my landlord called me up and said, great, so you can drop off your check at my house, here's my address. I was like, what? Like, I have to drop off a check at your house? And that was such a good lesson. Susie was her name, by the way. She was a lovely lady. We got to know each other well by the end of the 12 months that I was there. She taught me a very valuable lesson, which is don't go into a market and assume that things are done exactly the same way there. And as soon as you realize things are done differently, even though for us, you know, check payments are, you know, a crazy concept, and I don't think to that point I'd actually written a check in my life. My business now that I'm working on, Payment Solutions in the US, has a very big focus on check delivery. So I think at that micro level, when you come into a new culture, a new company, new market, really pay attention to what those differences are and then deliver solutions and solve problems for those.
Yeah, I'd kind of run on that. You know, when you do go to new places, you naturally have an inclination to think how you think. I mean, we're humans, and people think somewhat differently. I think an important lens, particularly when you are a B2B SaaS company, I can talk very specifically from an SMB, where our economics are pretty tough. You do have to challenge what you hear through kind of A/B testing, whatever you want to call it. And the most relevant example for us was, you know, we were told, and we still get told, that, you know, to sell, particularly in places like Western Europe, it's a face-to-face market. I'm sure many of you hear this phrase, and it's absolute rubbish, because, you know, we've proved we've got the best part of 20,000 customers on the continent, and we've done it exclusively from inside sales in London and Galway. Now, that's not to say that's always right, because in Asia we run the exact opposite model. We've got a small satellite office in Bangkok, and then we've got reps distributed throughout Asia. So don't be shy to challenge what you hear, and kind of, you know, you take what you hear and from a cultural perspective and layer it into your business. And, you know, if for us, we had to make inside sales works because the economics of having reps on the ground just wouldn't have. So that's, and then from a one of the questions that we get asked is, you know, if we did it differently, what would have we done? And the number one thing that I personally would have done differently when we grew the sales was really beef up on ops, like sales, marketing, customer ops, as a core competency to help the exec diagnose their business. Because without it, you're stabbing in the dark.
So on our side, also cultural differences was really a challenge. I think it's the main challenge. We do business in Thailand, in South America, and it's basically another planet there. You know, you just to do a conference call, you don't understand them. Over a conference call, it doesn't work, so you have to travel several times there to meet them in person. So that's very different culture. How we overcame this challenge is by hiring a very diverse range of people. So we've got, in our team, we've got people from different backgrounds, so India, Pakistan, Korean, Brazil, somebody from Brazil. I mean, so I hired out of 20 people, I think I've got 8 different nationalities that are represented in the team. So with this kind of team, then you can basically talk more easily to your clients and engage more easily. So I think that diversity is also a solution to your problems.
Krish, anything? Bring us up?
Right. To reflect on what I would have done differently, just like how they say always be selling, I should have kept my antennas up for always be hiring, the hiring mode, to look for talent everywhere globally. Right. So even though the customers are in 53 countries, we only have location in 2 places. Right? And I would say if we had started hiring more locally, right, in different regions, that could have been helpful. But that requires, as a founder, right, to start wearing the CEO hat a little bit more seriously, to say, right, because we are always in this rejection mode, like founder, right, not CEO. And it's important to actually think about that in terms of global expansion, to actually see that, okay, so you're actually getting a lot of traction and there is dollars coming in from this region. So optimizing and always be hiring is something that I would tell myself, right, if I were to go back in time, simply because it just takes a lot more time than we imagine to look for the anchor hire. So it's important to continue to network with a lot of people around the world to try and find out who else we should be talking to, right? And for me, the best channel was our own customer support, building relationship with our customers. And then after solving the problem, right, I always try to engage in casual conversation with those very same people who are directors of sales in different regions or head of customer support in the region, to talk about who else they know that I should talk to, right? That has been the super helpful channel for me to just build a relationship with our own customers in different regions, to try and understand the local market a little differently from their lens. And I should have started doing that much earlier.
Yeah, great. Thank you. So I might open it up for questions. We've got a few minutes left. Any questions from the audience for anyone? Do we have, I'm not sure if we've got mics. Yeah. A few at the back here.
Yeah, thanks. That was really good. I guess question maybe for all of you, but you talked a lot about tools and systems and operational competencies to expand globally and do that well. Probably a common sort of decision to make. What is a core product, and what do you sort of outsource to like a different tool, and where do you draw the line?
So when you say core product, you mean what you develop in-house versus...
Yeah, that's exactly.
Develop nothing. You're as a tech business, your value to yourself as a founder, your business and your investors is in that uniqueness of your product, your market, and what you can do, not in building like CRMs and that kind of stuff. It's why I advise an Aussie company now that's trying to go global, and the presentation earlier stated very nicely, because you can do something doesn't mean you should, right? So they've built an in-house CRM and are now trying to migrate to Salesforce, and they've got 2,000 customers and they're trying to grow 200 a month. So they're effectively trying to change the wheels of the bus while it's going. So I would look at what you as a founder business as your core competency is, and really focus on that. And there are systems and tools that can do pretty much everything else at, to be honest, a relatively low value. I mean, this is super tactical, but people building extensive custom integrations to Salesforce, that can all be automated through tools like Tray.io and Zapier and that kind of stuff for $700 a month. So they might seem expensive, and you can do it, but I would always encourage you to focus on everything else.
And whether it's expensive or not, most of the time the internal argument is, hey, this is very easy, right? Let's do it. And then the question I would try and pose is, okay, so are you going to say you're going to build it, or build, maintain, and improve it? You're going to maintain it, right? And how long are you going to handhold that and continue to improve it? Then they'll be like, okay, no, I don't want to do it, right? Then they'll hand it over.
Yeah, the typical example is try to build your website. If you're building a product on top of that, I'm going to build my website. That's not going to work, right? The time that you are going to spend building your website and maintaining it is going to be basically driving you out of running your business and the focus of your business. So yes, I completely agree. Buy rather than trying to build some these other tools.
But we do know the counter example which Stripe did, which is brilliant, right? Which is the Stripe email internal knowledge base, I guess.
I like visibility. So Stripe has a point of visibility in terms of emails where you can put things that make them visible. And I think that the point, I would say there is a journey, just to Dai's point around like journey of like teams and people, is I think our theory on that was probably very helpful from a scaling point when you're not in the same room, where you can hire super strong generalists, new in market early, and give them access to everything they need. That was kind of a lot of the theory around that sort of thing, which was...
and it's also open source, which I love.
It is, yes. Yep. So, like to share.
My question is on... Sorry, Lynn Wood from Idea Spice. My question is on product development, and it's for Amanda, and that's because you're developing accounting software. And there are two parts to my question, basically. Interesting that you started from New Zealand with Xero and then tailored the software country by country. Was that helped by the fact that IFRS, International Financial Reporting Standards, are now across the world apart from in the US? And secondly, when you were developing the software, how much were you dealing with accounting firms vis-a-vis standard setters and the regulators?
Yeah, so there's definitely some nuances in every individual country, and what we're seeing as a trend across, the accounting industry and the finance industry is a standardization of messaging with ISO and things like that. So I think in the next few years there'll be more capability for us to deliver solutions globally, but it has been very much for us a focus on each individual market. In terms of, what was the second part of your question, sorry?
How much you deal with accounting firms like KPMG and Pricewaterhouse vis-a-vis directly with the standard setters and the regulators?
So we're heavily involved in conversations with the government in all of our key markets, and we really are driving, for us it's about driving outcomes for small businesses, and we actually need to have a seat at the table in those discussions to drive outcomes that will help increase small businesses' ability to grow and expand. And one thing, we've been very successful in all of our markets is collaborating with accountants and bookkeepers, because these are the advisors, these are the most trusted advisors that small to medium businesses have. So in terms of finding a distribution channel that can actually help you expand, it's been really important for us working with accountants to deliver not only product that helps them, but product that helps small businesses.
All right. I think we're over time, so there's a couple. We probably need to stop now, but I'm definitely be around. I'm not sure if other people will be around for a little bit longer for a coffee or something. So if there's any questions for any of us, please do come say hi. And otherwise, please thank Krish, Amanda, Dai, and Remi.